The sky was dark. Rain fell hard over the muddy ground. Pigs walked slowly through the thick brown water. A crowd of aliens stood nearby, laughing, pointing, shouting cruel words. In the middle of the mud pit, a young alien woman lay still, her blue skin covered in dirt, her hair soaked, her clothes torn and sticking to her body. Her eyes were wide, not with anger, but with shame. She didn't fight back. She didn't scream. They had already taken everything from her home, her freedom, her name. She was thrown there by her own people. They called her broken, useless, and disgraceful. One alien even kicked mud at her face, laughing louder, as she coughed and turned away. But she didn't cry, because even her tears had given up. Everyone around her turned away as if she was just part of the filth now, something less than life. And then, footsteps, not loud, not angry, just soft steps pressing into the mud. A human man, tall and calm, stood at the edge of the pit. His boots sank into the ground, but he didn't stop. He looked at her not with disgust like the others, but with something she hadn't seen in a long time. Pity. No, not exactly. It was something deeper. Something stronger. He walked toward her slowly, even as the mud sucked at his boots. His jacket was already wet from the rain, but he didn't seem to care. The crowd stopped laughing for a moment, confused. "Hey, human, she's trash." Someone shouted, "Leave her. It's not your problem," Mother barked. But the man didn't answer. He knelt down in front of her, his knees sinking in the cold filth. She looked up at him, unsure if he was here to mock her too. She had seen many faces, most of them cruel. But his face was different. He said only one word. "Come." She blinked. Was he serious? Her arms shook. She tried to push herself up, but slipped again, falling back into the mud with a loud splash. A few aliens in the crowd laughed again. The man didn't laugh. Instead, he reached out his hand. A strong hand, clean hand. She stared at it. No one had touched her with kindness for so long. She had forgotten what it even felt like. "Take it," he said again. His voice was soft, but steady. "I'm not leaving without you." Her body trembled not, from the cold but from the fear that this was just a trick. But something inside her, something small and buried deep, told her it was real. Slowly she lifted her hand. Her fingers touched his. And for a moment, the rain seemed to stop. The world fell quiet. He pulled her up not with force but with care. Her body was light, too thin from hunger. She could barely stand. So he placed his arm around her, helping her walk. The crowd began to murmur again. "What is he doing? She's not worth it. He'll regret this." But the man didn't listen. He looked straight ahead and helped the woman out of the mud. Step by step. Her legs barely moved, but she kept going because he didn't let go. He led her away from the crowd, down a quiet path that cut through the trees. The rain still fell, but it felt softer now. He brought her to a small cabin, old, but warm inside. He helped her sit near the fire. She looked around with tired eyes. It was the first place in a long time that didn't feel like a prison. The man returned with a blanket and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. He gave her a cup of warm broth. She held it with both hands, her fingers shaking. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. She didn't answer. She had forgotten what it was like to speak to someone who didn't want to own her. The man didn't push. He just sat nearby, giving her space. After a while, he said, "I'm Luke." She looked at him. His name felt simple, kind, real. After a long pause, she whispered something. Her voice was soft, almost broken. "Vela." Luke smiled. "That's a strong name." She blinked in surprise. No one had ever called her strong, not since. Since before everything, she looked down at the fire. For the first time in years. Felt something warm that wasn't burning. Vela didn't sleep that night. She sat by the small fire, staring into its soft glow. The blanket Luke had given her was still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. Her clothes, once torn and muddy, now rested in a corner, drying beside the flames. Luke had left clean clothes nearby, but she hadn't touched them yet. Not because she didn't want to, but because she still didn't believe this was real. Was this another trick? She had seen such things before. A kind smile that led to chains. A gentle voice that turned into shouting. A helping hand that ended in cruelty. So, why was this human different? Luke hadn't spoken much after she told him her name. He had simply nodded, left some food beside her, and given her space. He sat across the room on a wooden chair, legs stretched out, reading an old book. Every once in a while, he would glance up at her, not to stare but just to make sure she was okay. She didn't understand it in her world. No one had looked at her like that in years. Most just looked through her like she was invisible. Or worse, they looked at her like she was nothing. Now this stranger, this human, had risked everything just to pull her out of mud. Why? The fire popped gently, breaking the silence. She flinched slightly, her eyes darting to the sound. Luke noticed. "You're safe here," he said calmly. "Nothing's going to hurt you tonight." She didn't reply. She wanted to believe him, but her body still trembled from old memories. Nights locked in cages. Days spent crawling through dirt. Hands that pushed. Voices that cursed. "I'm not expecting you to talk," he said after a moment, placing the book down. "Or to trust me. Not yet. But you should know something." She looked up slowly. "You're not trash," he said. His words hit like a quiet thunder. She hadn't been called anything but trash in years. Hearing those simple words spoken softly, with no force made, something ached inside her. It was like her heart had forgotten how to feel. And now it didn't know what to do. She turned her face toward the fire again, hiding the small tears that rolled down her cheeks. Not loud tears, just quiet ones. Tears that had waited far too long. Luke stood up. "You should rest. There's a bed in the next room." She froze. A bed. She had slept on cold floors, metal cages, hay mixed with animal droppings. But a bed. Luke saw her hesitation and didn't push. "Or you can stay here by the fire. Wherever you feel safe." She gave the smallest nod. The floor here was warm, and she could see him. That made her feel less afraid. Luke nodded too and stepped into the next room, giving her privacy. The cabin became quiet again, but it wasn't the scary kind of quiet. It was the kind that wrapped around you like a blanket. She finally closed her eyes. The next morning, sunlight peeked through the wooden window. The rain had stopped. The birds outside chirped softly. Vela opened her eyes slowly. Her body ached, but something felt different. The pain was still there, but not as loud. The silence still hung in the air, but it wasn't cold. Luke was already awake, cooking something in the small kitchen. He looked over and smiled gently. "Morning," he said. She nodded quietly. He placed a warm plate in front of her. Simple food, eggs, some kind of bread, water. She stared at it for a moment, before slowly picking up a fork. He didn't watch her eat. He just stepped outside and gave her time. When he came back in, he carried a small bundle of cloth. "Thought you might want these," he said. "They belonged to my sister. She's not here anymore. But I think she'd be happy if they helped someone." She looked at the folded clothes. Clean, warm, real. She reached out slowly, her fingers brushing the fabric. It felt soft, kinder than anything she'd touched in years. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke smiled. "You're welcome." That was all he said. He didn't ask for her past. He didn't demand her story. But still, she wanted to tell it. She looked at him, then down at her plate. Her voice was weak, but steady. "I was supposed to be a healer," she said. "In my world, blue-skinned women like me were trained in medicine. I've studied for years. But then the war came. And everything changed." Luke didn't interrupt. "My family sold me," she said quietly. "They thought I was useless when the hospitals fell. They thought I'd be safer with the traders." She gave a bitter smile. "But traders sell. That's what they do." "And I was sold. Again and again. Until one day, someone just threw me into the mud and left." Silence filled the room again. Luke took a slow breath. "But now you're here." She looked at him. "For how long?" "As long as you need," he replied. Something deep in her chest cracked. Not in pain, but in release. Like something old and heavy had finally broken. Maybe, just maybe, this man didn't look away because he saw what others couldn't. And maybe she wasn't broken after all. Luke stepped outside, letting the morning air hit his face. The sky was clear now. No rain, no thunder. Just soft wind brushing against the trees. Birds sang in the distance, and the mud was finally beginning to dry. Inside the cabin, Vela sat. Near the small mirror on the wall, staring at her reflection like it was a stranger. Her hair was still damp from the bath she had taken earlier. It hung around her face like a curtain, hiding parts of her skin that were now cleaner, but still scarred. Purple bruises dotted her cheek. Faint lines marked her arms where chains had once cut into her. She gently ran her fingers along her cheekbone. And frowned. The girl in the mirror didn't look like the healer she once trained to be. She didn't look noble or respected. She looked like someone who had been discarded. But as she touched her face again, she remembered something. There was a time long ago when people bowed their heads to her. When her name meant something. When she wore soft robes and her blue skin shimmered under the temple lights. She was once beautiful. Not in a way that made others jealous, but in a way that made others trust her. She had a calm voice, a steady hand. People used to come to her for help, for healing. Now they wouldn't even touch her. She stood and opened the small bag Luke had given her. Inside were folded clothes, warm, clean, simple. A long dress and a soft cloak. She touched the fabric and closed her eyes. Then, slowly, she dressed. When Luke returned with firewood, he paused in the doorway. Villa stood near the window, her posture straight. Her hair was brushed, flowing gently over her shoulders. The long dress hugged her thin form, and the cloak rested lightly on her arms. She still looked fragile. But she also looked proud. Luke said nothing at first. He didn't want to break the moment, but when she turned to face him, her eyes searching for judgment, he offered a small smile. "You look like yourself again," he said. She blinked. "What do you mean?" "Mean?" he continued, placing the wood down. "Whoever you were before the mud, before the pine, I think she's still there." Vela looked down, unsure what to say. No one had spoken to her like that in a long time, as if she mattered, as if her past was worth remembering. "Do you know," she said softly, "I once healed a governor's daughter with only my hands. And herbs. She had a broken spine. Everyone said she would never walk again." "What happened?" Luke asked. "I spent 9 days and 9 nights by her side," she replied. "I used heat stones, oils, pressure, even songs." She walked on the 10th day. Luke nodded slowly. "That's not nothing, Vela. That's something powerful." She gave a weak smile. "It was, back then. Still is," he said. She paused. "Do you believe people can come back? From anything?" Luke thought for a moment. "I believe people are never really gone, just buried. Sometimes under fear. Sometimes under mud. But if someone sees them truly, sees them, they can rise again. She looked at him. And you see me? Yes, he said. I do. Later that day, Luke showed her a corner of the cabin he hadn't opened yet. This was my sister's room, he said, gently pushing the door. She passed years ago, but she kept a lot of books. Medical books, alien anatomy, healing arts. Vela's eyes widened. The room was dusty but filled with knowledge scrolls, tablets, handwritten notes in different languages. She stepped inside slowly, touching the worn pages. This is sacred, she whispered. My sister wanted to help everyone, Luke said, but she didn't live long enough. Maybe you could use them. Ella turned to him. You're giving them to me? I'm not giving, he replied. I'm sharing, like you will someday. She stood silently, her fingers resting on a book that talked about bone regeneration in non-human species. She used to study this. She used to teach it now. Maybe she could remember again. I don't know if I'm still a healer, she said quietly. You don't need to know, Luke replied. Just start, eh? That evening, Vela sat by the fire again, but this time, not as a victim. She sat with books in her lap, a pencil in her hand, and fire in her heart. She wasn't just surviving now, she was rebuilding. The village wasn't far from the cabin. It was small, filled with rough voices and suspicious eyes. The kind of place where everyone knew everything about everyone, or at least thought they did. For weeks, people had been whispering about the human who took in the alien woman from the mud. At first, they thought he'd brought her in as a joke. Then, they thought he was just lonely now. They were growing nervous because she hadn't left, and worse, she was standing taller. She walks in clean clothes now, said one shopkeeper. I saw her near the forest, holding a book. Another muttered. She used to crawl in the dirt, and now she looks us in the eye, grumbled a farmer. The whispers grew sharper. Some were angry, some were jealous, some were afraid. They didn't like the idea of a filthy alien becoming something better. Not in front of them, not beside a human. Inside the cabin, Vela sat by the window, reading in soft sunlight. Her skin was healing. Her face had color again. And when she smiled, it didn't feel strange anymore. Luke brought her a cup of tea and sat across from her. You've read that chapter 5 times. I know, she said. But I still don't understand how your people use these antibiotics. He smiled. You're learning fast. She looked outside. Do you hear them sometimes? The villagers? He asked. She nodded. I hear them, Luke said. But I don't care. You should, she whispered. They're getting louder. Luke placed the tea down. Let them talk. Can't take away what you've rebuilt. Vela didn't answer. She knew he was trying to be strong for her, but she had lived among cruel voices before, and they rarely stayed just voices. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, someone threw a stone at the cabin. It hit the wall with a loud crack. Luke stood up quickly and stepped outside. The yard was empty. The wind rustled through the trees, but no one was in sight. Another stone hit the front door. This one had a note tied to it. Luke picked it up and read it in silence. Then he folded it and placed it in his pocket. What did it say? Vela asked when he came back inside. Nothing important. He lied. She could see the truth in his eyes. They want me gone, she said quietly. They're afraid of what they don't understand, he replied. That's not your fault. Vela stood. It's not your fault either, but you're in danger because of me. I'm not afraid, Luke said. You should be, she said, stepping closer. Because I've seen what fear does to people. They don't stop at words or stones. Luke looked at her face, no longer just scared, but protective. She wasn't just worried about herself. She was worried about him. 2 days later, they went into town together. Vela wore the same cloak Luke had given her. Her face was calm, but inside, her heart beat fast. She could feel eyes watching, cold stares, silent judgment. But Luke held her hand. That simple act made the silence crack at the market. An older woman refused to sell them vegetables. She's not allowed near food. The woman hissed. Luke didn't argue. He simply took Vela's hand again and walked to the next stall. Ah. Man spit on the ground near her feet. You should have stayed in the mud, alien. Vela said nothing. But she looked him in the eyes. Not with hate, not with fear. Just quiet. Strength that seemed to bother him more. They returned home before sunset, as the door closed behind them. Luke sighed. "I'm sorry," he said. "Don't be," she replied. "I stood beside you." That matters more. That night, Vela stood in front of the mirror again. But this time, she didn't just see her face. She saw a survivor, a fighter, a healer. She wasn't just a shadow hiding in someone else's kindness anymore. She was becoming herself again. A week passed, and then, one morning, there was shouting outside. Luke opened the door. 3 villagers stood at the edge of the yard tough. Angry, armed with sticks and blades. "Send her out," one of them said. "She's not welcome here." Luke didn't move. "She's not going anywhere. She brings shame to our village," another spat. "We won't stand for this." Vela stepped outside, standing beside Luke. Her cloak moved gently in the wind. Her eyes met theirs without blinking. "I am not your enemy," she said. "You're filth." One man growled. "No," she replied. "I was in the mud because of people like you, but I rose. And the man beside me gave me back my voice." They didn't answer. Maybe because, deep down, they saw she wasn't weak anymore. Maybe because they were afraid of what they couldn't silence. Luke stood taller. "She stays." He said, "If you come back here with weapons again, you'll see what I stand for." The villager stared. A moment longer. Then they turned and left. Vala's hand slipped into his dot, and this time, she was the one who said it. "I'm not leaving." The sky was quiet that morning. Too quiet. Vela stood in front of the cabin, watering the small plants Luke had helped her grow near the fence. Her cloak fluttered in the breeze. The dirt no longer scared her. She touched it now with purpose, not pain. Each leaf she cleaned reminded her she was still alive and changing. Inside, Luke was fixing the door that had been cracked during the last visit from the villagers. But something felt wrong. Vela noticed it first. The birds had stopped singing. The wind had stopped blowing. She looked toward the trees and saw movement figures. 5, no, -6. All walking toward the cabin. All armed, she dropped the watering can and turned. "Luke," she called out. He stepped out with a hammer in hand. "I see them." The villagers were not hiding this time. They walked straight through the field, boots crushing grass, eyes filled with purpose. Angry, sharp, cold. This wasn't just about fear anymore. This was about control. The man at the front Graydon was the loudest of them all. His voice had stirred the village before, and now it carried hatred like a weapon. "You've been warned," Graydon growled. "We told you to send her away." Luke stood firm. "She's done nothing wrong. She's an outsider." Graydon snapped. "Filthy alien trash. She brings weakness to our people." "She's stronger than you," Luke said calmly. "You're afraid of a woman who survived worse than anything you've ever faced." Graydon stepped forward. "Then let her prove it." He threw a staff down at Vela's feet. "Defend yourself." Vela looked at the staff. She hadn't fought in years, but she didn't need to look at Luke for permission. She stepped forward, barefoot, calm, quiet but not broken. She picked up the staff and held it with steady hands. Her stance shifted slightly, her knees bent. Her eyes locked on Graydon's. "I don't fight for sport," she said. "But I will fight to remind you, Mir, not your victim anymore." The villagers laughed. "She thinks she's a warrior now." "No," Vela said softly. "I think I'm free." Graydon rushed toward her, swinging a wooden rod. She moved aside, graceful, like a memory coming alive. She had trained in temple schools long ago, before chains, before dirt. She had learned how to use energy, not force. Balance, not rage. Graydon charged again. She ducked, turned, and tapped the back of his legs with her staff. He fell, face first, into the dirt. The crowd behind him gasped. He stood up, face red, fists shaking. "You little," he attacked again. This time, she didn't move. Aside, she blocked, parried, stepped in close and pushed him back with a simple spin of her staff. He fell again. Harder, she didn't hit to hurt. She hit to speak, and the message was loud. "I am not yours to break." Graydon sat in the mud, panting, defeated not just by her strength, but by the way she refused to hate him. Vela walked to him and offered her hand the same way Luke had offered his to her. Graydon looked up at her. He didn't take it, but he didn't attack again either. "Go home," Vela said. "Tell your village, I will not run, I will not hide. And if you come for me again this time, I won't hold back." Graydon stood slowly. He didn't look her in the eyes. He turned and walked away. The others followed. Some looked back with something new in their eyes. Respect, maybe. Fear, probably, but one thing was clear. She had changed the story. Later, inside the cabin, Vela sat with her head in her hands. Luke knelt beside her. "You didn't have to fight." She looked up. "Yes, I did." Luke gave a small smile. "I know, and you did it your way." She nodded. "They came to take away what little I had. But I fought, not with anger, with truth." He handed her a cup of water. She took it, and whispered, "Do you think they'll come back?" Luke looked out the window. "Maybe. But next time, they won't be facing the same woman." Vela gave a tired smile. "No," she said. "Next time, they'll face me." That night, she lit a small candle and placed it by the mirror. She stood in front of her reflection, not as a broken woman, not as a slave in chains, but as Vela, a healer, a fighter, a woman reborn from mud into light. The morning after the fight, the village was strangely quiet. No stones, no threats, just the sound of wind brushing against leaves and the smell of wet earth after days of tension. Inside the cabin, Vela was pouring hot tea into 2 cups. Her hands were steady now, not shaking, not afraid. She had stood her ground. She had protected herself not with hate, but with calm strength. Luke entered the room with a small smile. "You slept well?" She nodded, like I was finally allowed to. He sat across from her and picked up his cup. "You changed something yesterday." She looked at him curiously. "Changed what?" "Not just their minds," Luke said. "You changed the way they see you, and maybe the way you see yourself." Vela stared down at her tea. He was right, for the first time in years. She didn't feel like a ghost. That afternoon, a knock echoed at their door. Luke and Vela exchanged glances. He opened it slowly to their surprise. It wasn't Graydon or the angry villagers. It was a young alien girl, barely 10, with small horns and a bruised arm. She stood beside her mother, nervous eyes wide. "We heard she was a healer," the mother whispered. Luke stepped aside. Vela stood behind him, her mouth slightly open in surprise. "You want my help?" he asked, gently. The mother nodded, tears in her eyes. There's no one left in our village who cares anymore. Vela moved closer and knelt in front of the child. Her voice softened. What's your name, Laya? The girl said, Veila. Smiled. Laya, would you let me look at your arm? The girl hesitated, then gave a small nod. Veil. I guided her gently to a seat and began examining the bruise. She pressed softly around the joint and nodded to herself. It's not broken, she said, but it needs care. Luke brought out the healing supplies. Vela cleaned the wound, applied a herbal salve she'd made from one of Luke's books, and wrapped the arm with cloth. Laya winced at first, then sighed in relief. The mother bowed her head. Thank you. Vela smiled kindly. You're welcome here. They left quietly, but word spread like fire. The next day, an old man came, coughing so hard he could barely stand. Then a young couple brought their sick baby. A woman arrived with a twisted ankle. They came in fear, in silence, in shame, but they left with healing. Vela didn't ask questions. She didn't demand thanks. She just helped, and in doing so, she began healing more than wounds. She was healing a broken trust between her and the people. In the evenings, when the cabin grew quiet again, Vela and Luke would sit outside under the stars. He watched her closely, her movements more confident, her voice steadier, her smile brighter. You belong here, he said one night. She turned to him. I'm still trying to believe that. He leaned back against the wooden railing. You saved lives this week. And you saved mine. She said. They sat in silence. Not because there was nothing to say, because they were finally at peace. One evening, Luke brought out an old box and handed it to her. Veil opened it slowly. Inside was a necklace symbol, with a polished stone in the middle. My sister wore it, Luke said, but she would have wanted someone strong too. Wear it now. Vela touched the stone. It was smooth, warm. I can't take this. You already have, he said, and you've earned it. She placed it around her neck and looked up at him. I was never meant to be alone, she whispered. Oh, right. I forgot what it felt like to be wanted. Luke didn't speak. He just held out his hand. She took it without hesitation. Over the next few days, something beautiful happened. Villagers began greeting her. Some smiled, some nodded, a few brought gifts, fresh vegetables, warm bread, wild herbs. The woman they once laughed at in the mud. They now came too for healing. They no longer saw a filthy alien. They saw Vela, a woman of wisdom, of courage, of grace. One morning, Luke walked into the healing room to find Vela teaching Leah how to mix herbs. The little girl giggled as she spilled powder on the table. Vela laughed softly and wiped it up. Luke stood at the doorway, arms crossed, heart full. He had pulled her from the mud butt she had built. Something far more powerful. She was building a life, and she wasn't doing it alone. The wind carried a strange smell that morning, something metallic, something sharp. Vela noticed it first. She stepped out of the cabin and looked toward the ridge, where the trees thinned. Her eyes narrowed. Movement, shadows, 6 figures, walking in formation, wearing black and silver armor with glowing red symbols. Her heart sank. She knew those symbols. Slaver, not the villagers, not angry farmers. These were professionals. Her past had found her. Luke stepped beside her. You recognize them? Vela nodded slowly. They were the ones who sold me the last time, before I ended up in the mud. Luke clenched his fists. They're here for you. Yes, she said. And they won't ask politely. The slavers arrived by noon. Their leader, a tall male with gray scales and a jagged scar across his eye, stepped forward. His voice was cold and smooth, like poisoned honey. "Property number 87K, he said loudly, so the village could hear. "You were stolen. We're here to collect." Vela didn't move. Luke stepped in front of her. "She's not property." "She was registered," the slaver said, lifting a glowing tablet. "She's marked under Galactic Slave Code. We have the right to reclaim her by law." "She's free now," Luke growled. "She's ours," the slaver snapped. "And if you interfere, human, your little hut will burn with you inside it." The villagers began to gather behind Luke and Vela. First 1, then 5, then 10. Even Graydon appeared, his arms crossed, no longer with hate in his eyes, but something closer to respect. "She's not yours anymore," Graydon said firmly. "You threw her away. Now she belongs to herself." The slaver sneered. "You think we fear farmers?" He lifted a Wapena pulse rifle. Several more slavers raised theirs too. Luke took Vela's hand. "Go inside." "No," she said, stepping forward. "I ran once. I hid once. Not today." She reached into her cloak and pulled out the healing staff. It's the same one she used to defend herself days ago. It wasn't meant for war, but in her hands, it looked like it belonged. Veil raised her voice so all could hear. "You call me property, but I've treated wounds you could never understand. I've saved lives with my hands and heart, not weapons. I survived your chains, your cages, and your mud. And today, I don't stand alone." The villagers stood behind her, silent, strong. Some held farming tools, some held nothing. But none of them walked away. The slavers hesitated. Something had shifted. This wasn't a scared slave anymore. This was a leader. Then, without warning, one slaver aimed at Luke. Veil saw it first. She stepped in front of him, her staff raised, deflecting the first shot with a flash of light and force. The staff's old power meant for healing cracked like a wave, knocking the attacker to the ground. The villagers roared. They rushed forward, not with rage, but with unity. Slavers panicked. 2 ran. 1 dropped his weapon. The leader tried to fight back, but a pitchfork from the crowd knocked the weapon from his hands. He looked around, outnumbered, overpowered, respected. He turned toward Vela. "I'll come back," he hissed. "You'll always be what we made you." Vela walked to him. She looked him straight in the eyes and said, loud and clear, "You made mud, but I became a garden." Then she struck the ground beside his feet with the staff, not to hurt, but to declare, "This is where I grow now." The slavers left, humiliated. No one cheered. Instead, everyone just stood quietly, watching Vela, seeing her not as an alien, not as a slave, but as someone who had earned their place with strength, dignity, and peace. That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in orange and gold. Vela stood outside. Brushing dust from her cloak, Laya ran up and hugged her waist. "You're like a queen now," the little girl said. Vela smiled. "I'm just someone who finally stood up." Luke joined her, holding 2 cups of warm tea. "You could have left," he said. "I did," she replied softly, "but I came back stronger." They sat beside each other under the stars, quiet, content, and when Luke looked at Horelli, he saw not the woman he pulled from the mud, but the woman who lifted herself far above it.